Good morning. Thank you, Senator. I really appreciate your support in this, and I want you to let you know, excuse me, I want to let you know that there are a lot of people in the military to support what the senators are doing here. Often you hear only one side of the story, and you're all heroes to a large number of our people who proudly serve this country. As the senator said, I served as the chief prosecutor for the Air Force for 4 years. And during that time, I had the opportunity to supervise 18 wonderfully dedicated prosecutors who did everything in their power to combat sexual assault. Thank you. Combat sexual assault. But there are only so much they could do because of the system. I served my entire career as a JAG. I loved the United States Air Force. My father was career Air Force. My grandfather was career Air Force. My family's dedicated 70 years to the United States Air Force. This is not an anti-military position. Nobody standing behind me is anti-military. They are very pro-military. But over the last 23 years, I've heard the voices of survivors who are not being taken care of. And that's why I stand with Senator Gillibrand. It is vital at this point to align military justice process with something comparable to what they would get in the civilian world. We know a very small percentage of victims report. And of those few who do, 60% state that they were retaliated against in some way. We know only a few hundred cases result in convictions of sexual assault in the military each year. Only a few hundred. There are reports of 26,000 cases of sexual assault, yet only a couple hundred result in convictions. Our sex offenders know that they can commit these offenses almost with impunity. That must change. After 23 years of seeing how our military process is often there to deny justice to victims while protecting their predators, it is time for fundamental military justice reform. I wholeheartedly agree with the reforms start by making independent military prosecutors responsible for the decision of whether serious crimes such as rape, murder, and sexual assault should be prosecuted and what those charges should be. Many Americans would be surprised to find out that somebody other than a prosecutor makes that decision in the Air Force. Currently, we have a system of justice unlike any other in the United States, in which a person who is not a lawyer and without specialized training or significant experience in military justice or criminal investigations makes these weighty decisions. In the military, a commander serving as the convening authority makes the call of whether a case should go forward or not, what the charges will be, and who sits on the jury. The convening authority is not legally trained. He's an officer with an entirely different skill set, usually in waging armed conflict, such as a pilot, a ship captain, and an infantry officer. For that skill set, they bring decades of training and experience, and in that they excel. The same cannot be said for military justice. They do not possess the skills required to determine the complexity of the right course of action and allegations of criminal misconduct, especially sexual assault and rape. It takes years of experience to become proficient in the prosecution of complex cases. By the time I became the chief prosecutor of the United States Air Force, I had tried over 150 courts-martial and presided over another 100 as a military judge. I had 19 years of experience when I took the job, and I was still learning things about prosecuting sexual assault. It is simply unfair to victims and to the accused that a convening authority makes these weighty calls based on only a few hours of legal training. It is unfair to the commanders to put them in this position as well. It is a system set up for failure. Those opposed to fundamental reform often claim that the convening authority only makes these choices based on the advice of a trained prosecutor. Let me make this clear. Convening authorities are not advised by prosecutors. Instead, they are advised by a staff judge advocate. Staff judge advocates are not prosecutors, and in many cases have very limited military justice experience. That experience is many years in the past, and the more senior the convening authority, the more years in the past that experience is for their staff judge advocate. Staff judge advocates often come from a civil law background, environmental law, contracts law, maybe law of war background, but very rarely is the staff judge advocate someone who has significant prosecutorial experience. SJA's staff judge advocates are generalists who serve in a managerial role more akin to a corporate counsel. In other words, commanders who are legal neophytes themselves are often advised by someone with more experience in contract law, environmental law than they have in military justice. Additionally, the staff judge advocate is not independent, and independence is key, and one of the great things about Senator Gillibrand's bill. He works for the convening authority. The staff judge advocate is significantly junior to the convening authority, and that convening authority controls his entire career. I want to make that clear. We've often heard through the debate that there are prosecutors who are giving advice to convening authorities, but that is not the case. Others who oppose reform argued that commanders are tougher than prosecutors in bringing these cases forward. That is something that's been said repeatedly. Let me make it perfectly clear. In my 23 years of experience, that is not my experience. My prosecutors were much tougher than the commanders when it came to prosecuting these cases. To compound the inherent problem of having someone who is not a prosecutor making these decisions is the commander's inherent biases. By law, the accused, the rapist, unless it's a rare exception, works either for the convening authority directly or indirectly. If the convening authority does not know the accused, he likely knows the accused's immediate commander. Oftentimes, there are mutual friends of the accused and the commander making these decisions. Usually, these friends will reach out in support of the accused. The victim has no such person in her corner. Over the last 2 years since the Aviano case, I have still seen commanders who use their poll to skew the system. In the Wilkerson case itself, 30 current and former commanders wrote letters attacking the prosecution, the judge, the jury, the criminal investigators, and the victim in that case. Let me restate that. 30 commanders, the ones that the Department of Defense says should be making these decisions, supported the guy who was convicted of sexually assaulting an innocent woman. These commanders included 3 general officers, a 4-star general, 3 convening authorities. Again, these are the people the Department of Defense expects our survivors to have confidence in. But even the public outcry of having a convicted sex offender set free by Lieutenant General Franklin has done nothing to quench the zest of commanders for trying to tilt the scales in the favor of the accused. Commanders continue to try to use their influence from keeping sex offenders from going to trial. In a recent case in England, 2 retired 4-star generals, including the former Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, wrote letters trying to deny justice for a rape victim based on nothing more than that the accused was a good guy in their opinion. In my last case, which was reported on by the New York Times, the victim in that case was retaliated against by her commander. Her performance report was downgraded. As Senator Gillibrand told you, he told her what did she expect? There was going to be negative consequences. He told a victim of sexual assault in her feedback that she needed to quit being too emotional. Too emotional. This is somebody that we're supposed to have faith in. The reality is the commanders cannot solve this cancer because all too often, many of them are enablers. Now, we've heard a lot of the senators talking about military justice, and for a lot of you, this is not something you have expertise in. But if I could explain military justice this way, imagine, if you will, an employee at Walmart. That employee is rated by a popular store manager, maybe someone who was Employee of the Year. The victim is brave and she reports the rape to the police. Now imagine that the police work for the store's corporate headquarters and that the CEO for the store will make the decision on whether the case will be prosecuted. In making that decision, the CEO will not consult the local district attorney. Instead, he will ask his in-house counsel whether it's in the best corporate interest to prosecute the case. Imagine the DA did not make the decision whether or not to prosecute the case. Imagine that even if the CEO allowed the case to go forward, that the district attorney would not determine the charges, would not determine whether there should be a pretrial agreement or anything else, a plea bargain, that the CEO would do that. And the CEO would pick the jury. And that everybody in the jury would be an employee of Walmart. And finally, imagine that the rapist's co-workers were allowed to come before that jury and say what a great employee he was. And based upon that alone, the jury would be instructed that the fact that he was a great asset to Walmart, a great employee, would be a basis to find him not guilty. Could that victimized employee expect justice in that case? I think the answer is no. Now, if you change Walmart to Air Force Base, CEO to convening authority, and store manager to pilot, that is our military justice system. It's a miracle that the small percentage of victims who do come forward actually do. As a military prosecutor, I have personally seen the abuse and injustice victims of sexual assault face in the military. If you really knew what victims went through when they walk into a military courtroom, walk by their coworkers, their bosses, their commanders, their first sergeants, their leaders, all sitting behind her rapist, you would understand why we need to do things differently in the military. At first, as the chief prosecutor of the Air Force, I truly believed I could help fix this broken system within. This changed as I watched commanders persecute victims while failing to prosecute predators. I realized that in order to see substantial change, I would need to leave the Air Force. I would need to leave the military that has been part of my family for the last 150 years. The ineffective, broken system of justice undermines the military I love. For the past 2 decades, leaders have spoken of zero tolerance. Yet year after year, decade after decade, the scale of justice continues to lead in favor of the accused. The rapist's boss should not be the one determine the fate of a victim's case. It's easy to say we have zero tolerance for sexual assault in the military, but that talk is cheap. The reality is every time we say zero tolerance, we have a victim who's told not to report the attack. Every time we say zero tolerance, we have a commander supporting those accused of committing rape or sexual assault. This crisis, and this has been acknowledged by the most senior leaders of the Department of Defense, as ripping the fabric of the force apart. It undermines unit cohesion and good order and discipline. It is time for the President and Congress, our civilian leadership, to exercise their authority and mandate an impartial, professional, independent military justice system. This is a force protection issue. The top military commanders in the Pentagon have argued that reforming military justice as proposed would undermine good order and discipline. This is exactly the same argument they made about good ending don't ask, don't tell. But when the President and the Secretary of Defense supported that change, the brass got behind it, implemented it without any disruption within the ranks. We need a professional justice system. Our victims deserve better. Someone who has been accused of crime deserves better. And the American people deserve better.